Right, so let's go ahead and make the player drop all of the weapons when the player dies. So over here, whenever we set this to true, so let me just drag from this and make a branch and ask if is dead is set to true, because later on we are going to set it to false when the player is respawning. But for now, the player is dead and we want to drop the weapon. Okay, let's go back as a reminder and see what we did for the drop weapon. So if I go back to the loot, equip, and drop weapon event or a graph, and for dropping the weapon, it's actually over here. And we press the button and then we dropped the weapon. So we actually just need to call this event here. So we're not really pressing a button. We're just forcing the player to drop all of the weapons. So we're actually going to do this. And this event looked for the equipped weapon type. And I think we need to modify this because it's not only the equipped weapon we need to drop, we also need to drop the other weapon that is on our back or on our thigh. So we need to actually modify this code slightly. And let us go back just to write it down and see what happens. So over here, let's call the server, I believe it's called request. No, not request, drop weapon, this one, and go ahead and call it. And now, right now, when we call this one again, it's going to drop the equipped weapon, but we actually want to drop all of the weapons on the in the inventory. So let me just modify this. I'm going for this event. I'm going to add a new variable, and let's add the weapon base because let's just give it the input we want here. So weapon base, and let's call it weapon. And instead now, here we have to specify what weapon we want to drop. So when we click on the button to drop the weapon, when we click on the G key, I want to drop my equipped weapon. So this one here, equipped weapon. So now this is correct. And for this one now, let's drag from here and say name, get the name variable, just like before, get weapon info, and break this, and then we can get the type. So instead of doing this, we can delete it and we can plug this in instead. And let me just move all of this code away. And so have all of this, and we can see what we are doing. Okay, so now we have organized everything and everything is looking good. Just expanding this here, expanding this here as well. Awesome. So now we have this set up. So now if we go back to the health and armor graph, now we can specify what weapon are we talking about. And we simply want to drop all of the weapons in the inventory. So instead of doing a for loop, I could do a for each loop again with the inventory here, and we could plug in the inventory, and for each of them we could drop the weapon. However, remember with a for each loop, it doesn't wait for this code to play. It's going to play two times of this drop weapon code, and it's actually going to bug your code here because it's going to change the weapon here. It's going to change this value here before you have a chance to finish this cycle of code. So instead of doing this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a manual loop. So what we can do here is we can take the inventory and just make sure this one is not empty because we don't want to drop weapons if this doesn't have anything. So let's take the length of this inventory and make sure that it is greater than 0 because we don't want to do anything if it is not greater than 0. So just like that, if it's greater than 0, also go ahead and drop the weapon. And then also, so if it is greater than 0, this means we have something in the inventory. So let me just get the first item we have in the inventory. So this will be at index 0. And I want to go ahead and drop this weapon. And let us drag from here, just like this. And I believe we don't need to do more here because if you go back to the drop weapon, remember inside of this drop weapon function, you already remove this item from the inventory because it's very, very important you remove it from the inventory now, else you're going to get a like an infinite loop here. So let us delay this code. Let's delay it by something like 0.1, and then we can go back and play this code again, because then we're going to say again, and I'm just going to make some reroute notes so you can actually see what I'm doing for this one here, just like this, and just make it on the other side as well. So what we are saying here basically is drop this weapon and then delay the code and then try to run this again. Try to check if this length is still over 0. Because remember, we remove it here in the drop weapon. So technically it should be 0 if we only had one weapon. However, if we have two weapons, the length of this will still be 1 because the length of it was 2 before because we had two weapons. So now it is one weapon. It's going to check again, is the length over 0? If it is, go ahead and take it again, take this weapon, drop it. So it keeps dropping until you don't have anything anymore. So you can drag from here and say no more or no weapons to drop. And this will like it will print the string if you have 0 weapons to begin with, or if you have dropped all of your weapons from the inventory. Now you can make this smaller, I believe, 0.05 maybe even, but let me just go with 0.1. Doesn't really matter, the player will not notice anyway. So let me just click on play and let's try it out and see if we bug out. So if I have this weapon here and this player loots all these weapons and I shoot this player. Actually, let me move this player over here so we can see the weapons being dropped. And let me shoot this player. And now you can see the player actually dropped the weapons here, this pistol and this AK. And if I just drop this and I go over to the pistol, and I actually have a pistol myself, so let me drop this. I can loot this pistol. I can even loot the AK this player dropped. I can drop it, loot it, and just like before, nothing really wrong with it. Awesome. So let's try it on the client as well. This was the server. Let me minimize this and go to the client. Click on play. And now for the server, I'm going to spawn the server. I'm going to loot a couple of weapons. And now as the client, I'm going to shoot the player. Awesome. And here they are. I'm going to drop this in 4. I want this AK. I can take it. Awesome. So everything is working right now. And right now we have a like an issue with not being able to loot 2 weapons. And so right now sometimes we have an issue where we have dropped the weapon and we can't really loot it because it tries to compare it with the dropped weapon. So let's actually go ahead and fix that as well. This is just like what we did with the loot weapon fix. So if we just go back to if I go back here in my graph, loot and equip, and this is the loot weapon code we did. Remember, we compared the loot weapon variable with the one we want to loot right now. And if it is the same, we cleared the rep notify and then we run it here. Because remember, a rep notify, if you have the same value run twice, it will not run. Simple as that. So let's go back and let me just open up the loot drop here. And let's go over to the drop weapon here. And the way I want to do this is because inside of functions, you can actually not make a delay like we did before here in the loot weapon, where we made a delay here before we run the code. In functions, you can't make a delay. This is something else. This is not the normal delay we usually make. So we need to actually do it outside of the function. So we need to do it out here instead. So over here, when we want to drop the weapon, let's make the code here. So I want to make the weapon to drop here and set it to nothing like this. And then I want to drag from here and say delay, just like before, set it to 0.05. And then I want to go ahead and drop the weapon. And before I do this, I don't want to do this all the time. I want to check if this is the same as before. So I'm going to take this weapon to drop and say, is this equal to the weapon here in the inventory that I just found? And let me make a branch. If that is true, I want to do this here. Let me move it back. So if that's true, I want to do this here. If it's false, I just want to run the code like before. And let me just reorganize this so you can actually see what's going on. Okay, just like this. So we're trying to compare the weapon to drop with the one we're trying to drop here. And if it is the same, we're going to clear this out and do all of this. Okay, awesome. So over here, we actually don't need this. We can just delete this one from here. And also the other thing, sometimes, again, the weapon become invisible because this actor cannot recognize this actor even though they are the same. So instead of doing this, let's just delete this, and let's just take it down here instead. So we constantly delete this weapon to drop before we set it again. And that is fine. There's not really any problem with this. And let us actually do that as well for the looting. So instead of checking if it is the same thing, let's delete this. And let's just do that because it doesn't really hurt too much, or it doesn't really hurt actually. So it doesn't really matter. So just go ahead and connect it like this. Go ahead and compile. And I'm going to click on play now, check again. And it's mostly for the client because this is where the replication issues will happen. So here is the client, and now as the server, I'm going to loot some weapons and stand out here. And let's kill this player. And now the player's dead. Now I'm dropping my weapon to loot this one up. And I'm dropping my pistol. Now looting the pistol works, so we can loot both pistols. Okay, and let's loot this weapon. So just keep looting the weapon, see if you bug out, if you have any problems, or if everything is fine. So you can see nothing is getting invisible, everything is looking good. I'm just trying to see if there is a bug right now. And I believe I saw a bug where actually I dropped the M4. You can see now I dropped the M4 when I press G instead. So right now the bug is if we choose a player here, and we equip two weapons, and if I click on G to drop the weapon, you can see the weapon on my back is getting dropped. And this is after the new edits that we just made. So let us check what is happening. So the problem is maybe with the eluding the weapon or dropping the weapon. So here for the dropping the weapon, we are dropping the equipped weapon. Let's just first check if this is true. So what is the equipped weapon? And let's actually do it down here. Let's do it down here so we can print out the weapon name. Just plug it in here and compile and save. So now it should say pistol when I try to drop my weapon, and it does say pistol. So the equipped weapon is correct, so there's nothing wrong when we loot the weapon. So now we know the loot weapon logic is correct. We're trying to drop the pistol, but for some reason the rifle is getting dropped. Now let us print this. And let me also try to see if I am unarmed or not. Actually, it doesn't make sense because we are here, we are dropping the weapon, so we know we are not unarmed. So we're dropping the pistol, and something is going wrong here. And I believe this loop, again, I told you before, loops do not wait for what you're trying to do. And this is one problem with loops sometimes. They just run the code. So if I just go back here, I believe it's trying to drop the second weapon that you loot because it's not going to wait for your delay. It's actually going to loop through and drop the last index. So I believe this is what's happening. So instead, let's us disconnect this. Let me delete this here and let me move this away. So now when we find a weapon, let's make a new variable. Let's make a new one called found weapon to drop. And it's this one. So found weapon to drop. Let's set this found weapon to drop to be true. And then let's break the loop because now we have found a weapon, and just make route nodes just like before. And what we can do with this now is let me just disconnect this and move this away. So now let's take this and make a branch and ask, do we have a weapon here? Found weapon to drop. If that is true, we want to first set this to false because the next time we do this, we want to make sure it is not bugging out. And so the next thing is we want to drop that weapon. So just moving this away here and this. Okay. So we're going to drop the weapon just like before, but we're going to do it down here when the loop is actually completed. And here, and the weapon to drop can just be the weapon that you have right now. Because remember, you have broken the loop, so it is still at the weapon you have found. So you don't need to do anything inside of here. And then we are going to delay, and then we're going to set this to be to interact with again. Okay, let's compile. And the next thing we want to do is, so all of this is correct, nothing wrong here. And the next thing I want to do, I want to go back to my health, armor, and damage logic. And over here, just make sure that you have this delay maybe to 0.2. I think I had it to 0.1. If it bugs out sometimes, and this is because you're dropping the weapons too fast, I think I'll make it to 0.2. And let us compile and save everything. So this is the logic we have so far. If you have missed anything, just make sure that it is looking like this, as well as the logic for dropping the weapon. If I just go back to my graph here, looting. So make sure the looting is like this. We removed the comparison. I can remove this reroute node as well. And so this is what we have so far. We just delete this variable instantly, delay for a little bit, and then we loot the weapon. Okay, so this is looking good, as well as for the drop weapon. We made this equipped weapon to be attached to this server, and then we use the weapon type here and make sure we break the loop like this so it doesn't bug out. Okay, so this is our logic so far. And if we need to, we can try to fix things again, but I think this should fix it. Let us and test out and make sure that nothing's bugging out. I'm going to minimize the server. I'm going to play on the client because this is mostly where the replication is going wrong. And let us take a weapon here as the server. And now if I go to the client or here with the client and I shoot the server, and here it is. I drop the weapon. I try to loot. I can loot it. I try to loot the pistol. I can't because I have one. If I drop it, I go over and I try to loot the pistol. You can see right now I have a replication issue with the pistol. So if I just close it down and take a look again. So here for the delays, I have 0.05 after the weapon drop, and then we delayed by 0.1 to make sure we can make like this interaction after we run this function. And also if you go back to the health, this one is 0.3. Now we can try to make it 0.2 again, but let's just keep it at 0.3 for now. And also before we test stuff, let's go to the death we made here. And instead of setting the mesh to collision enabled, because for the mesh, if you go down to the collision, you can see that it is interacting with the weapons as well. It's interacting with the world static and world dynamic. And so let us try to not enable collision. So only physics, not query. So we're not overlapping with the weapons and causing issues. So instead of collision enabled, I'm going to set physics only because we're only interested in physics so we can make that ragdoll effect and fall on the ground. So physics only should be good here. Let us now try it out and see if it works. I believe I got a bug before with interacting player. So I want to recall this bug so I can fix it. And here as the player or the client, let's shoot the server. And now I can drop this, try to loot. I can loot the AK, the pistol. Now I can loot the pistol as well. And I don't have any problems. And if I exit, you can see here I got an error saying access none trying to read the property interacting player. And if you just click on the error here, you go to it, and it's just getting an error here. And I believe it's the player who's dying. It is actually setting that player to this. So when it says access none, we can just fix this by making sure it is valid. So if I just move this away, and I can take this and right click and convert it to a validated get. And let us make sure it is valid before we continue. And then the next thing as well is the bug here, because it gives me that the error is here as well. Now I made this is valid because it also comes from up here. You can see it comes directly to this loop. So even if though we fix this, this will bug because of this one. So make sure this is valid. And also here, it gave us an error because of this one. We're trying to check things when this is not valid. And let us make sure here after the player, and I believe we are interacting with the player who's dropping the weapon. So let us copy this up here, paste it down here, and make sure this player is not the one that dropped the weapon as well, because we don't want to loot the weapon we just dropped ourselves. That doesn't make any sense. And let us move all of this away, just like this. And actually, I think we can delete this one because we're already asking for this. So let's make a branch and let us connect it together. Connect it with here. If this is true, we're going to set the interacting player. And let us move it forward. And I believe we can delete this because we just checked this. So let's delete this, and that should work fine. And this one, we are setting it, and then we're checking if it is valid. That is fine as well. Okay, so now let us make some reroute nodes. And the reason why I'm not deleting this and just connecting it here like this, because I want to make sure this is valid before we continue, because we are also coming from up here and actually directly connecting to this. So we're, even though we're up here, we actually need to make sure this is valid before we continue. And over here, I'm also going to make sure that the player is valid. So dragging here and saying is valid, and go ahead and connect it as well. So making sure that the player is valid, and also making sure that the player is not the one that has dropped this weapon. Now let's shoot the server again. And now let's drop the weapon, loot the weapon. Let me just make it larger so you can actually see what's going on. And now everything is working. I can drop the pistol. And if I loot two things and I drop, we drop the pistol. So we don't have that bug anymore. Okay. And I can loot everything. And I don't get any bugs when I quit this. Okay, so everything is working now. I know it has been confusing because we had a lot of bugs we need to take care of. Make sure that when the player is dead, you are dropping the weapon. So we're getting this first weapon in the inventory if the length of the inventory is over 0, which means we have a weapon in the inventory. So we're dropping the weapon and also delaying by an amount that would not make the weapon here weapon drop bug. So 0.3 at this point right now. Maybe we can reduce it to 0.2, but I'm satisfied with this right now. No one's going to notice anyway. And then inside of the weapon drop, we made this loop here. We made this boolean so we don't bug out, and we don't need to replicate this variable because we're only checking things inside of the server. We're never using this variable outside of the server, so we're never using it on the client. So we don't really need to replicate it. And so we're running through this, and we're clearing this variable first before we drop the weapon. So we drop the weapon, we delay it to make sure that this is run, and then the players can interact with it once again. Now the delay is 0.1 for this one. And finally, for the loot weapon, again, we just directly removed the loot weapon variable, rep notify, cleared it, and then we run it down here. Okay, so that was all. I know it's a bit confusing, but we had to get rid of all those issues. Now, again, if you have any issues, you're more than welcome to visit my website, pixelhelmet.com, or you can always talk to me on Discord as well. You can see my Discord on my profile, and it is just the Pixel Helmet as well. All right, thank you for watching, and let's move on to the next lesson.